Hello, good afternoon or good morning, everyone. This is Sarah Viner. I'm back online for our next installment of the Schoology training. So hopefully you've all managed to take a listen to the other installments of the training so far. And this training is going to be specifically focused on grading. So a couple objectives to start off with that we're going to be working through today. We're going to start by organizing out the gradebook for individual courses. We're going to look at entering, editing, and overriding grades in the gradebook, as well as editing those settings in bulk. And then we'll look into setting up scales as well as rubrics and copying those gradebook settings that we create over to other courses. And we are actually going to skip out the last section around the SAS grade sync, as I know there are a few different things happening there for you all. But we can go ahead and revisit that at another time if that makes sense. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into our agenda for today. We're going to look into all of those different pieces that we walked through here, and I will start off by jumping into the grade setup piece under the courses themselves. Now, I know this is the course that we have been building out, so again, I don't know if anyone's not yet joined this, but you can go ahead and hit pause on this recording, and then just grab that access code to go ahead and log in. You'll need to just put that under the courses and then join my course here. This just has a lot of good resources and information. So far, I know no one from the school has joined so far, so I'm hoping that you guys do have a chance to revisit these recordings and trainings and actually join the course there. I've got a lot of good resources to pull from, so do feel free to jump in there. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use a slightly different course for today because the gradebook itself that we're using here, because there's no one in the course, when I go ahead and click on the gradebook, you're going to see it looks really sad. So only my fake student is in this course, which is not very helpful. So I'm actually going to jump over to a different course that has some more information in it here. Sorry, there it is. And I'm going to go ahead and click on gradebook. And then immediately as I click on gradebook on that far left-hand side under that navigational column, I'll see the option to click on grade setup directly below it. And so once I've jumped in here, you'll see I have a ton of different information. So to begin with, I know you all have specific categories that are already set up for you. So you do not have to worry about setting up those categories any differently than what you have already been told. I've spoken with Erin and Jesse about how those should look. And I know your weighting and your setup should all look pretty much the same. So you don't have to worry about that. In addition, you're going to find that those grading periods and final weights, those are already set up for you. And I believe that you actually have decided around those final grade settings to already set those up as you have now. Now underneath it, you're going to see a few extra options here, and do feel free to sort of not use these check marks. If you're going through the course itself and you feel like you already have categories set up, it's already a little bit much, you don't really need to do anything else, then you can go ahead and just sort of ignore this last section. That's completely fine. But there are a few options to note that could come in handy at some stage. So the first thing is that you do have the option to give yourself override columns. So what are those? Well, in this space, you actually have the choice to decide whether you have what we would say sort of as the final say. So that final say over the grades themselves is going to just give you a little extra grading column, and that will allow you to just put in your own final grade for those students. So just as an example for a scenario, perhaps you have a student who has been working really hard throughout the year. They've had perfect attendance, and they haven't really had any issues as they've been going through the course themselves. Well, you might choose to actually change their grade. Let's say they have, a 42, and the cutoff for an A or for a B is 43. You might want to go ahead and change it just up that 1% at the last moment so that they have a slightly higher grade. So that's really up to you, and it's completely up to your own sort of subjective ideas of how students do, but it's nice to just have that sort of autonomy over that final grade. You can do exactly the same thing, but for the grade period as well. So the first option would be for the entire course, and the second option would be just for the one grading period that you're currently in. If you do grade in points instead of percentage, you have the option to go ahead and add a total points column, and that will allow you to show your students their total points. Now you can always go ahead and decide not to use those total points, and you can also, if you do, you can hide it from students at the bottom of this page too. If you're using something like an exception code that might change the overall grading points, perhaps you're using like the missing exception code, for example, and you don't necessarily want your students to be worried about their overall average. Every time I put in a missing code, it is going to generate a 0, populate in with 0, and I'll show you that in a moment. And maybe you don't want your students being concerned that their overall grade is really being altered by those sort of scenarios. Well, in that case, what you could do is just go ahead and hide the overall grades or hide the grade for the overall grading period. And that would just mean that they have a little bit less information, it's slightly delayed, they're not sort of tracking their average. Instead, they're taking responsibility and being held accountable for each specific assignment that gets a grade on it. Now this page is not auto grade, it's not auto save, so you will need to click save changes when you're happy with this. And then on the right hand side, these are two aspects that we'll talk through here. I know you guys already have some custom grading scales that are set up. I think it's called the YesPrep official scale. And that is all set up for you directly in your scale space. So every time you come into the course, you should actually see on this list a YesPrep official scale. If there is some kind of a scale that you need to make, you can go ahead and click Add, and then click Scale. And at some point, you might choose that you may want to make some sort of a scale, for example, like a mastery scale. And you can actually, instead of just including letter grades like a standard letter grade, you could choose to write something like exceeding, meeting, approaching, not meeting. And you can change the ranges yourself here. So perhaps 85 is exceeding, 70 would be meeting, 65 would be approaching, and anything below 65 would be not meeting. And I can click use average to go ahead and just calculate those different pieces out, or I can just type them in myself, going to 100, going to 85, 70, and 65. And if I do choose, I can also decide to use only the letter grade. Now I'll show you what this looks like. It's pretty great if you are ever using this scale specifically, but I'll save that scale for you. And now I have that specific mastery scale that's set up here for me. Alternatively, you can go in and actually create rubrics from this space. So I know that we talked a little bit about rubrics last time, and you can go ahead and click on that rubric icon, and it will pop up with the rubric space for you to make here. I can actually apply any of those points-based grading scales here as well. So if I want to use the terms that I've set up already, I can apply a points-based scale. It cannot be percentage-based, it doesn't need to be points-based, but I can apply that in this space specifically. And you'll notice that you do have this gear icon next to them. And those are there because you might at some point want to go in and copy this scale or this rubric either one to your resources. So I can click that gear icon, I can hit save to resources, and then it will be saved in my resources to both share with my other courses, as well as to share with other teachers. So really flexible in that way. Now the other option you have for sharing these within your own courses is that you have this copy settings icon in the top right. And when you click on that, you're going to see that I do have the option to copy the categories, the grading scales, and all the rubrics all the way over to any of the other courses that I am the administrator for. So if I teach 3 different courses and they're all pretty much graded the same way, well, I probably don't want to have to set up this page over and over again. For that reason, that copy settings icon is there for you to just be able to push the same information that you have on this page into any of your other courses and not needing to sort of reinvent the wheel each time. So that about covers it for our setups themselves. As I said, I'm going to just ignore the grading categories here because I know that they are already set up for you. But I am going to jump into the gradebook itself. So go ahead and click on that gradebook icon. Do feel free to play around in both these spaces while I'm showing you in my version. So you'll notice, remember I gave those 2 overall feed columns. I have the option to override this total grade. So for example, if Abby Allen currently has 102 points, and I really don't think she actually deserves to pass that highly, I could go ahead and just override that final grade so that she has a different final grade here. I can do the same with that ongoing grade category as well. Now in the gradebook itself, I actually have the choice to do that similar process with any of the different grades I've given here. And you'll notice, for example, this assignment is currently based on a rubric. So if I want to grade one of these assignments, I can hover over this box and it will show me the rubric that I graded this on. And once I'm ready, I can just populate that and I can give grades here. And so now Lacey has a grade directly in that space. I can also choose to give her feedback based on these specific criteria here. So the far right-hand side, you'll see that little speech bubble icon. I can actually give her feedback on one specific area of the rubric here, directly from the gradebook page. Or I can click the speech bubble in the bottom right-hand corner and give an overall comment on this grade. Now you'll notice there is a default here, and that default is that you are not currently displaying this to a student. So that is automatically there for you in the gradebook. You may be just sort of keeping comments for yourself. This might not necessarily be important for your student to notice, but you do want the option to be able to display this to your student. So if I was going to write something like, "Great job, Lacey," well, that would clearly be information for my student. I could display it to her. If I was trying to write like extra credit for turning in early or for helping another student or that kind of thing, that might be a comment that I do not want to display to my student. It's more private. Now in the bottom right-hand corner, in the bottom left-hand corner, I'm sorry, you're actually going to see that little eraser icon. So that is the override icon statically across the platform. If I do want to clear this override, I can go ahead and click on that. Before I had given it a grade just by clicking on, so that was a grading scale that I had set up, the alphabetical scale, and I could just give it a grade by clicking on those. Now that's not graded from the course page. And you will notice that this quiz was not submitted because there's no icon in the top right-hand corner. So I'll show you what it looks like when someone has submitted. For example, Stephanie, she actually did submit a student's an assignment here in this work, and I can actually go straight to that assignment. So the top right-hand corner always has that assignment for you. And now here, I can grade normally, but not in the gradebook itself. And now I'll notice that perhaps it was late, so I might want to take off a few points. But I could just jump directly into that space and give her a grade from the gradebook itself. So now, I forgot to save it, I think. Now she should have a grade for that assignment here. And then moving along on the corner of the left-hand side, the bottom corner, you'll see that little exception flag. Well, you may have the option to, or you may want to, actually include an exception mark. And so those flags will tell you whether they're excused, incomplete, or missing. And notice that when I mark something missing, it does have a 0. So that's really important to note because, of course, that's going to completely throw a student's average. So do be careful of using those exception codes. If you do not want to include that exception code, you'll just click on it once more and it will disappear. One other thing to keep in mind is that perhaps you do want to mark something missing, but you don't want the student to have their average completely affected. Well, you could go ahead and just give this a 0. In the total points. Directly in this space, you'll see how much that overrides this. Perhaps it's actually, you give, 55% minimum. So I might want to give something like 10.5, that sort of thing. And then I can go ahead and use that comment icon to say missing work. And now my student actually has the comment here, and it's clear for them to see. So they're going to see this hover over on their gradebook themselves. So that's the other option for not using the exception code that will give it a 0, but still wanting to be able to give that student feedback about their missing work. Now let's say it's past the due date, and I do want to make sure that all of the students who haven't turned in work in yet, they get that missing exception code. I could go ahead and click on the 3 dots at the top of this assignment, and I could mark all the empty cells as excused, incomplete, or missing. This is a really great feature for just helping students sort of keep track of their own work, because grades will be posted in this scenario. So all of my students that haven't currently turned anything in, they're going to get a notification that says a grade has been posted for this assignment. And obviously, if it's missing or incomplete or excused, or rather just missing or incomplete, not excused, then they're going to know that they need to jump back in there and make sure that they complete that work later. I can also set all the grades in one specific way. You can't do that with rubrics, so I can do this here under Quick Quiz. Let's say you were giving a grade to all of your students for their participation in class, and every single student, except for maybe one, got 100% on that assignment, well, I could go ahead and select all grades, set all grades, confirm that, and then just find that one student who I know should not have 100%, and I can change their one grade. So very easy to change out those numbers here for yourself as well. Then I am currently showing you all of the pieces in the ongoing grading period. You can switch between grading periods up here. You can also switch between categories, and that does include one area which is called ungraded. So if any of your work is not currently assigned a category, you will not see it within this gradebook space. This gradebook is only for grades that are actually counting towards the final grade. So when you actually want to see any of those different pieces that are perhaps ungraded, you'll just click on the ungraded item, and then it will show you any extra work that is not currently in a grading category. Moving along, you can sort this in several different ways, as you'll see from that drop-down. And you can also go directly to any areas that are missing grades or that have specific grades. So if you're working with a student and their parent and you're trying to figure out which of their assignments are currently missing, for example, you can use this little item to say, well, let's show all of them marked missing or all of them graded with a new assignment, that kind of thing. It's just a really nice way to get a quick check of your gradebook and make sure you're on top of everything, as well as getting really specific information for students. On the right-hand side, this plus sign is really handy if you ever need to create a grade column. So you realize here, you'll notice here that you can actually add assignments, tests, and quizzes and discussions from this space. I will say that doesn't get used quite as much as the grade column, just because usually teachers tend to know kind of in what location they want their grades to show up in, or their materials to show up in. But the grade column is really helpful. So if you select Add Grade Column, you'll notice here that I can go ahead and put in some kind of a name. So maybe I'm grading for participation today, participation in the Socratic seminar we run. It's going to be worth 50 points. And I'm definitely putting it in participation, and the scale is just going to be numeric. Now, if there are some students who are there and then only a few of them are being actually graded on this, I could go ahead and individually assign this to a few students. And I do always have the option to align learning objectives, and I can make this unavailable to students if I want to as well. I can unpublish it. Otherwise, this is going to be a grade within the gradebook itself, and it will calculate towards the overall grade for my students. So once I create that, you'll notice that the last thing that shows up on this page is that participation piece. And it does currently have 50 points, and I can just drop down this list and go ahead and give students points for that. Also helpful is these 3 dot icons. This is where you're going to find that bulk edit feature. So I'll click that bulk edit for you. Now let's say about halfway through the year you need to change some of your grading categories, or you need to sort of reset the points value because you've realized you've calculated it incorrectly. You can jump into this bulk edit page and you can change out different grading periods. You can fix factors or points that they are worth. You can actually attach rubrics to them here as well. And then also due dates and grading periods that they're attached to, really easily changed. Furthermore, if you want to unpublish something, you can go ahead and just check those boxes here. And then once you're happy with the way it looks, you will want to save the changes on this page. So this is a really handy page. If you ever need to do any sort of overhaul, big shifts that you might need to do, you can go ahead and do that directly in this space here too. Also from those 3 dots, you have the option to export your grades. That will go into a CSV. And you can also print reports either for individual students or for all of your students at one time. They're going to print on sort of separate pages. So this is a great amount of information that's based on how their grades are doing right now. And you can go ahead and click on the little graph, the little bar graph icon next to the students' names. And you can look specifically at their gradebook as well as their mastery tab and attendance if you are tracking that there as well. So I know you'll be syncing your grades back to your SIS anyway, so you may not need to spend too much time in this space if you are more concerned with actually pushing this back to your SIS and then printing it out from there. But this is always an option for you here too. So lots of choices of printing out those reports here. All right, And so lastly, I'm just jumping into the Mastery screen here. I know you're probably going to dig into Mastery in a little bit more depth at another stage, but just so you know, this is a secondary place to be able to go ahead and visit. There is a ton of information here. It will track on any of those learning objectives that you use. So I highly recommend taking a look at both the Mastery tab as well as the gradebook and keeping an eye on just both of those pieces. Your Mastery settings are super flexible, so you can set this up in a lot of different ways to be able to make it show the way you want it to. I'll just walk through a couple of those features here. So I've currently got it set up to being worth points values. I could display those achievement levels on the mastery scale I was using before. So for example, 80 was going to be the minimum for exceeding expectations, 70 for meeting, or maybe I decided it was 85. And then you do have the option to only show this little mastery star once a student has demonstrated something multiple times. So let's say on the third time that a student demonstrates mastery, that's when I will allow them to see this little mastery achieved star. And I'm currently grading the overall objective by average, but I can change that to highest score as well. When I hit save, you're going to see that the words are actually displaying on this page. So instead of having the information that you are looking for in numbers, here you have the choice to go ahead and see the words instead. So just a little bit more straightforward to actually interact with if you are focusing mainly on those scales using words. So that was using that scale that I set up myself. I set up that percentage-based scale, and then I chose to only show letter grades. And in this case, my letter grades are exceeding, approaching, and meeting. And all of that information is going to show, I'll try and show you a student with some work attached to her. Here we go. All of those pieces are going to show that are directly related to the assignment objectives. So any of those learning objectives that I chose, they're all going to be right there for me. And I will see in the top right-hand corner, I'm going to see how many times my student has actually demonstrated or addressed that learning objective. So far they're all showing ones, and when I hover over them, I'm able to actually see what was submitted for that grade. But I can also decide to look for multiple options here too. So currently it's one, but it will show however many are eventually attached to it. And if I wanted to look at my student's mastery grade, I can go ahead and click on that student's name, and it will show me how they're doing in relation to each of those objectives on this page too. So this is a really handy place to come to just get a quick sort of snapshot of how many assignments or interactive items you're attaching to which different learning objectives. Lastly, on the mastery page, you have the option to look for objectives across the entire class as well. And so this will show you how many different objectives have been met by which assignments. So in introductory assignment and assignment on the Olympics, both of those address this one character growth trait. So that was one of my custom learning objectives. And similarly, you'll see a lot of the different Common Core objectives, they're just really being met by one assignment. So I can look through this list and think, well, I need to, address a couple more of these assignments with different objectives here as well. Okay, so that's sort of a brief overview of mastery. Now, I know that a lot of questions often come up during our grading sort of seminar webinars. So I really encourage you to jump into our YesPrep page and ask any of those questions that are coming up now. So once more, I'll go ahead and pull that up for you. This is the YesPrep page, so you can zoom in if you'd like to. Please do feel free to post any questions that you have on the parking lot here. So the parking lot is there for you to go ahead and post your questions on, and I will go ahead and respond to them directly in the parking lot space. If I don't get back to you before the session that we have when we're going to be doing a Q&A a little bit further down the line, then I will certainly respond to those questions in the Q&A themselves too. So I'll look forward to seeing the thoughts that you all come up with, and I hope this was helpful for everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and thanks for listening. Bye-bye.